Well, thank you, Johnny Hanna, for being with us today. I'll give a quick introduction. If I missed anything, let us know. But today we have Johnny Hanna on with us. He is the founder of Homie, Entrada, and a few other things, if I understand correctly, and the father of 8 children.
Woo.
And quick background of why we were so excited to have Johnny on today. I found out about Johnny from LinkedIn. He's been an advocate for mental health and just talking about it openly as a CEO, as an entrepreneur, and it's been helpful for me and many others. And so I guess that's a good maybe place to start is when did you realize you wanted to start talking openly about your mental health when it wasn't even cool?
Before it was cool.
Before it was cool, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think I've just had a history of people in my family that have struggled. I had an uncle that committed suicide when I was serving my LDS mission, and that was really impactful to me and to my family. I've had several good friends also take their lives. In 2019, I had an immediate family member that I caught in the act, and I was able to save him and stop him. So it's kind of been an awful pattern. But it's all of those experiences have made me want to stand up and be vocal and let people know that, I think more people attempt than actually end up, taking their lives. And so I think it's just something that needs to be talked about and discussed. And the more I've seen it happen here in the Silicon Slopes community, it's continued to be a fire for me to speak up. I also had a coworker just right after I left Homie. A month later, I went on a road trip, and that coworker, he and I were texting back and forth, and then just 2 days later, he took his life. So yeah, it's a really deep, hard topic to address, and of course, mental health is much more beyond suicide.
Right.
But that's probably what keeps pulling me in and keeping me focused on trying to eliminate the stigma and just be more open and more vulnerable.
Yeah. I love that. That's so, it's so hard to hear that people have to go through that their mental health has to get so bad that they have to surrender. And that's part of my story, why I started to get into it as well, is losing people that I loved or getting close to losing them. That's a big part of my story, Justin's story, one of our other co-founders. I know Mike has some loved ones who've unfortunately gone that way as well. And so it's never easy to hear those things, but what we've learned is to use that as kind of fuel. And it sounds like that was similar to your story of using that to fuel you in a way.
And I've read Justin's story too. Yeah, it's heavy. All these are heavy topics. Like, we're joking around here beginning this podcast and it's like, boom, suicide.
We're going right into it.
Like just, drops. But yeah, the people that are left in the wake, it's just so devastating, and you want to do everything you can to stop it. And I don't know where it starts, but if there's, anxiety that starts building up, depression, your mind starts spiraling on something, like, it seems like, those are the areas that if you can target it early, you can stop it before it goes any further.
Yeah. So as you started opening up about it on social media and just in general, what did you start to see in your life? What, both the benefits and also the way that people reacted to it?
Yeah. I was shocked at how positively it was received. For the most part, a lot of people will be like, hey, LinkedIn's not a place to talk about this or any place, like, just keep that stuff to yourself. But I was in a leadership position as the CEO. And I thought, this is so important for me to speak about this. I was getting, we were fundraising, we were having a ton of articles, positive articles about us, complimenting us. We had amazing growth. And I'm like, this is the perfect time to speak about it as a leader.
Hmm.
And I brought it up with all of our employees. And I remember just the first time I was really open. I mean, it wasn't anything that I was really struggling with, but I put so much effort into my company meetings. I wanted to be dialed in and be such a polished leader. And I'm not a polished leader. And I stutter, I stumble. And I just spoke openly with our team. And I just said, look, I'm tired of worrying about this meeting. Like, I just want to be raw and real with you and share with you some of the struggles that I've had coming to these meetings or going to my board meetings and feeling all this pressure, all this anxiety, which I know so many of us feel, but a lot of it was really heavy on me in so many instances. And so I just said, look, I'm done. I'm going to be real. I'm going to fumble. I'm not going to be as polished. And they were like, you always fumble and you're not very polished. Like, what are you talking about?
Like, this isn't news to us.
This is news. This is normal. But just getting it off my chest and saying that and letting them know, like, I want to have more of a focus on mental health. It was applauded. And immediately as it was applauded, I'm like, I also struggle to take, in-person credit like that, and I'm like, let me get on with the rest of the meeting. But I caught myself and just took it in. Took in their support and their applause, and it was so tender for me. And I choked up, and I was appreciative. And after that meeting, several people came up to me right away. And it feels like in this community, people are just ready to dump everything they have. If they can feel they trust you, they want to find another advocate. And so I realized I became an advocate in that moment. And I had one employee said, I just checked into the state hospital last weekend. And he was a great employee. And I'm like, are you kidding? And and somebody else said a similar thing. And we really have no idea who's struggling. Like, in that moment, I realized I thought I was struggling, but I didn't check myself in to a hospital.
Right.
And they let him out, and he continued to do great work. But I continued to stay in touch with him too, and just learned more about his challenges and his struggles. And we have such a strong bond now, more than we would have ever had. And those examples happen nonstop. On LinkedIn, you'll get private messages. I'll get phone calls just when I'm driving, like driving here. I've had instances like this where I'll get somebody just calling me out of the blue and say, hey, I'm really struggling right now. Can you call me? I got a text last night from a friend who's saying, hey, can we go on a walk? And I didn't have time to meet with them last night. And it's like, I can't be there for everybody, but I want to, I want to help as many people as possible. But that's, I think that's what happens when you open up and when you're vulnerable. People are seeking somebody to talk to.
I think, go ahead. All right. So I think especially in the workplace, this is interesting to me because in the workplace and even on LinkedIn, it's kind of like you show up with your mask on of like, I've got it together, I'm polished, all the things that you said, right? And it's because we're trying to be professional and we're trying to look competent and we're trying all these things. And there's this counter movement of like, no, we can be more real and authentic and open. And I think that's a really healthy thing. And then I think there's this danger too of it swinging too far where now it's like, am I relying on my colleagues or my boss to like be my mental health expert? And, and am I looking maybe in the wrong place for that support? Not to say that I need to be secret about it, right? I can be open, but also I'm not trying to make the workplace my group therapy space, right?
Or LinkedIn.
Or LinkedIn, right?
Yeah.
So like, how do you think about that? Having been through these experiences, like how do you kind of think about what's that right balance? What's the way to approach that?
I don't really have answers, but I feel like the answer in responding to people that might be using their executive team or using LinkedIn is compassion. Like clearly they're struggling,
right.
Clearly they need help. Clearly they need someone to listen to them. They need some validation. So I don't know. I think that's, I think I've been attacked for some cringe stuff that I've posted, or said. But if I'm struggling and posting that stuff, I don't need to be attacked. I need help.
Right.
I need support. And so I think if people just see all of that and realize, and maybe it is too much laundry that's being aired, but be compassionate to that person.
Yeah.
Like, and if you have time, reach out privately, or suggest different modalities that might work for you that help you feel healthy. Be supportive instead of tearing people
Yeah.
down.
Yeah. That's that criticism, right? It's like certainly
That's not
helpful. Right. Right. No, I appreciate that. And that's something that we have been learning in our own journey of creating this brotherhood. And there are instances where it's like, some people just need to connect and have an authentic conversation. And then there are cases where it's like, there are people that need more, qualified professional help than just sort of, a good conversation. It's
Absolutely.
Like, and so we're, figuring that out as well, as how do we support wherever somebody's at with that lens of compassion. How can we best help them? But be able to discern, like, oh, I can't step in as like in the role of what maybe a professional could or should be doing to help. Right. So that's it's kind of a tough lesson, because you want to, be there for people and help them out. And then there are just times where it's like, I'm not qualified or I'm probably not the best resource, but I can support you in pointing you to the help that would be most beneficial. Right. I can be your advocate, and I can be with you in that. Anyway, it's been an interesting journey. I'd transitioning a little bit into your personal story of, so you opened up, you were vulnerable. It was met with probably a lot of relief from a lot of people, right? Because then suddenly they can take the mask off a little bit. They can take the guard down a little bit. From there, I'm curious what your journey of just mental wellness has looked like. What practices have you taken on, and then both for you personally, and then how do you show up as a leader and a supporter? Because we all know, like, it's hard to give from a place of empty, and so we got to start by filling that vessel. And I'd be curious to hear what's been helpful for you.
Yeah. You got to have your own reservoir to draw on before helping someone else, or you got to put on your own oxygen mask before fitting the one on the person next to you. Yeah, my wife has been just my best friend since we got married, and so we just talk about everything constantly. We don't watch the news. We don't have any really favorite TV shows. And so whenever we go on dates or just hanging out, we just have deep conversations, and it's meaningful and it's connecting. And we've studied a lot of different modalities. My wife has become certified as a neuro-linguistic programmer in timeline therapy. And she's also she's certified in the body code and the emotion code. And so she's gone down this path, and it's been more like uncovering the roots of your false beliefs and going into your childhood and really examining, why you behave the way that you behave now, or why you believe what you believe. And that's been absolutely fascinating. I mean, I've done that with her for the last several years, and I feel like I've been able to heal in a lot of ways, uncovering what that root false belief happens to be. Meditation has been key for us as well. We try to get up really early every morning. We have a little dedicated place at our home that we go and meditate. And it's a separate place, no electronics. That room is dedicated just for, we call it our peace room. And so we go there and take our problems and meditate. And my wife and I believe in a higher power, and that's who we go to. And it's been like, we try to do it every morning, and it has been life-changing to be consistent in doing that. And doing it as a couple, which has been really interesting too. But yeah, those are some of the things that I have shared with other people of what's helped me. But again, you mentioned yoga, and there's so many other avenues, exercise in general, or reading, continuing to expand your mind and skill set, can be a motivation and take you away from depression and other things. But it's so complex, and it's different for every individual.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I love what you shared, and it is reminding me of some of the experiences we had at our last retreat in Arizona,
last week.
we did some similar work to what you just described of what your wife was certified in, and in that sort of timeline, and going back and figuring out where those limiting or false beliefs are that we created, usually from childhood, right? Super fascinating work. And then you get to these breakthroughs and you find these truths that are so empowering and just amazing.
And you cry like a baby.
Yes, yes.
Yep.
You tap into that inner child. Yeah, there's a lot going on there. I wonder if you'd be open to it, if there have been any of those kind of breakthrough moments for you that have felt particularly meaningful or impactful, and have potentially enabled you to better lead and serve and support those around you.
Yeah, there have been so many. I'm trying to think of what the best one is, or what the most fitting one is for this instance. And I'm not. I think it's more the practice, maybe diving in there of what it is.
Sure.
Because people might think it's a little woo woo,
Right.
a little off. And honestly, like when even at my company, when I brought up mental health and therapy and whatnot, there's always going to be that group that's like, that's not for me.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm totally fine. And they may be.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say for anybody listening, like, what did I listen to? I listened to the Ed Milet show. Do you guys know Ed Milet? He has a podcast, and he had some mental health professional that did something similar. And he was at he just, every time he traveled, he would only do room service at every hotel. And while he was on the air on this podcast with this lady, like, she helped him unpack it. And this is the story that popped in my head. I'm like, it's not mine. You asked for an example, but yeah, and I am an open book, and normally have like a list of things that I'll be vulnerable about, but yeah, nothing came to mind. But Ed just talked about how he hates going to restaurants on these road trips, and she went through this timeline therapy in whatever way she did, and she said, look, there's trauma from our childhood. It might not be a capital T trauma like of abuse, but it might be a lowercase t trauma of just an instance that like really affected you and you had meaning. And so as she worked through this with him, he recalled a time when he was young and his dad yelled at the waitress or something, like caused a scene in a restaurant, and it just embarrassed him.
Wow.
And he just, as he was sharing this, like he just choked up and started crying about that experience and realizing that's why I order food to my room and I don't go to restaurants. And he's like, wow, thank you. And she's like, yeah, of course, but those little memories that pop up, if you can take those and unpack them and really see them and not relive them, but understand the emotions you went through, and recognize how like little Johnny might have been hurt, or little Ed Milet was affected, and have compassion. And then see how many other Johnnies were affected in that moment. How many others felt that same thing? What else do they have to say? What other memories are there that you can pull from and recognize? And can you then validate your younger self, and go through that process to where you patch that hole that exists inside of you, and come away from that stronger, recognizing this is why I have that reaction, or this is why I have that emotion, or this is why I have that behavior. So that's what popped into my head. But
that's awesome.
They're
such a good example.
They're deep, and it takes, potentially, an hour or two of meditation to go through something like that.
Yeah.
And lots of times guided. And I appreciate that example, because I feel like when people hear about getting to the inner child or trauma in general, it puts a lot of people off, because they're like, well, I didn't experience abuse. I didn't experience those things. So it's good to hear an example of something that maybe wasn't, like you said, not a capital T trauma, but something that just at one point made us feel isolated, or made us feel scared, or made us feel at one point out of the norm, especially as a child. So I appreciated that example, because that's a lot of the times these types of things that you have to work through that don't necessarily stunt growth, but that that explain why you make the decisions that you do, and when you, upon discovery, allow us to change our brains and change the rewiring there so that we can not make those decisions again. And it doesn't always have to be a big deal, like room service versus going to a restaurant, right? But there are things that we can unpack so that we can move forward in our lives and make better decisions moving forward. I really loved that example.
Well, I don't know how many of us don't remember our childhoods.
Right.
Why? And talking to a lot of psychologists and reading some of the studies, a lot of people start to remember the trauma of their youth in their 40s and 50s. And some of those people will be attacked and be like, "Oh, you're just now coming out with this?" And it's like, well, they blocked that memory as a kid. Of course they didn't want to ever remember it, but they now remember it. They now see it.
Yeah.
They're now having to unpack it. They're now having to heal from it. So that's also something that I think needs to be destigmatized.
Yeah.
Where somebody might make a claim that, hey, this happened in my youth. And it's like,
Well, why did you wait so long?
why didn't you ever,
Right.
and there's also natural fear of retaliation, or look, you know what? Time has passed, and maybe that person hasn't done anything to anybody else, but they did this to me. If you put yourself in other people's shoes, and again, go back to compassion, there can be less judgment and more curiosity.
So this is a question, I guess, for both of you. But when those things happen, what do you say when somebody says, "Well, why don't they just move on? It's from their childhood." What do we say to those types of people that respond that way? And I say that from some personal experience, right? Of seeing that happen, where people say, "Well, you just have to be a man and move on," right?
I'm sure I've said that.
Right.
Times.
Sure.
Like, man up, yeah,
Right,
or whatever.
right.
Cowboy up is what I was told growing up. I think just posing a question, you can just say, "Huh, yeah, I wonder why," or "I wonder this or that." That is interesting. Have you ever, do you remember every part of your childhood? I read this book, or I read this study that some of this happens later. So I think educating yourself will help you to be in a position to help others see more clearly. But I still say stupid things,
Right.
and I still make mistakes too. But yeah, I think in those instances, I try to have sources, and there's just so much. There's so many things we still don't understand. This friend that I mentioned, or this immediate family member that tried to take their life, I helped them be admitted to the University of Utah, the Neurological Institute up there, and I think it's a great program. But they did electronic shock therapy, and what that means is they electrocute you. And it's like if your computer's messed up and all your programmers say just reboot it and then it works, that's kind of the same thing. Now it wasn't. I was able to be there for 12 of these operations, but what they do is they give the individual a lot of muscle relaxant, and then they're basically knocked out. But the reason they give a muscle relaxant is when you're electrocuted, you just tense up, and flex everything. So make you bite on a sponge, or not sponge, or like something soft that you don't hurt your own teeth as you do that. But the amount of electricity I think they put through from your temples is hardly enough to even power a light bulb. But they do that, and they do it from 30 seconds to 1 minute. And I was allowed to be there for every one of them. And you just watch, your loved one there just go through this. And then they take off, the things and say they'll wake up in 5 minutes. And, this individual was in such dire circumstances in their head, just thought the world was going to end. And that's why they wanted their life to end. And when they woke up, they were like, "I feel amazing. What happened?" That was the greatest thing I ever went through, but they were really reluctant to do it. But then after a little bit, they went right back. And so they did it 12 times, because every time that lasted longer, up until the 12th time where they felt good, going forward. And they said about 80% of people are good. The other 20% have to keep coming back every few months and go through that again. But while there, I was incredibly curious, and I was asking the doctors, like, what on earth is this? How does this work? And there were different doctors that I worked with there, but they all said, we don't know. It just works. It works, with 80% where they probably don't ever need to come back. But it was just a hard reboot, of their mind. But like, so I've gone through that.
Wow.
But how do you even, like, you doctors can't even explain how that works. That's where a lot of this is so new, and a lot of people are against that form of therapy or whatever you call that. And watching it, I
see why,
you
right?
can see why.
Yeah.
But seeing the outcome of it,
Yeah.
if you don't have other options, and that person continually wants to take their life, but by the end of it, it works. It's like, okay, I guess they know what they're doing in that aspect. They've tried it enough times. They've seen results.
Yeah. Wow. So in your journey of being a father of many children, having a lot of responsibility, taking on leadership, entrepreneurship, tell us a little bit about your sort of relationship and journey with mental health during that. Just I know your wife has gotten certified in different things in recent years. I'd love to just hear what it's been like for you as you've just been navigating those waves of, the ups and downs, the ebb and flow of life. If any particular moments or stories stand out to you of, hitting a low point and then coming out of it, or whatever it might look like. Would love to just hear more about, like, your experience with this.
Yeah. This is one that popped in my head, and it might be one of those little small T traumas. I think it's
sure.
even smaller. I don't even use the word trauma for this experience, but my new company, we just held our first client summit where all of our clients and a few prospects came. We went to Southern California. It was just this beautiful resort on the ocean, and we hired a keynote speaker. His name is Ed Vistris, and he was my keynote speaker that I had hired right when I left Entrada. So my last client summit at Entrada, the same keynote speaker for the first, and he's hiked Everest 7 times,
Wow.
and I think 3 or 4 of those times without supplemental oxygen. He's the only American to climb, like, the world's 8,000 meter peaks without supplemental oxygen. Just like this, he's basically the greatest of all time at.
Wow.
It's summiting these peaks. Like, he's just an amazing individual. So I was with him, hanging out, getting to know him before knowing I was going to introduce him. And I had a little script that I had memorized. I was super excited about it and really calm and laid back. And then I got up on stage and I started off really well. And I had a little teleprompter, but I didn't really need it, so I wasn't reading it. But in the middle of it, the teleprompter just stopped. And my heart froze, and I went blank. And I'm new to this business. I'm coming back. It's been 8 years.
Okay.
But and I've been a CEO. I've had a lot of speaking engagements. So I'm like, to freeze on a stage, I'm like, what am I? I'm like, what am I doing? Anyhow, I froze, and then I just kind of bumbled through the notes, and then introduced him. And I dwelled on that nonstop for about 2 weeks. This was recently. And I was beating myself up. And I didn't even want feedback from my coworkers because I already knew not how badly I messed up. Like, I know it wasn't the end of the world, but I was just so disappointed in myself that it made me sick. Like, and I've done those type of things where I've spiraled in my mind to a point that's totally unnecessary. And I know I've gone to points where I've gone to a dark place, spiraling too far. So, with all of the trainings and everything I've gone through, like, I was able to kind of walk myself out of that. I feel much better now. I have talked to a few people about it now too. That was helpful. But it's still one that I want to go and do that timeline therapy on and be like, okay, what emotion was that, and why did I feel that way? And of course, anybody can be embarrassed at any time. That's a normal emotion, but the spiraling afterwards is the piece to me that I caught, and that is real. And I know that it's more serious than just a little mistake. When
you're ruminating,
on
it like that, yeah. It's
so
something that touches that nerve of.
That's really recent, and again, that's not trauma, right? You know, but just extreme disappointment taken really far.
Yeah. No, I can 100% relate with that, and I'm sure we all can. You know, something happens and we kind of obsess over it for a while, and that is a really good indicator that there's something there to uncover, right? Something there underneath that to say, why was that so devastating to me, right? Even if it's not a big deal, right? But it's just something that sets us off. And I think for sure there's got to be a link there of a false or limiting belief, a wound, whatever that is, and to be able to unpack that, address it, and find some clarity, and then look back on that with compassion, with now the wisdom of that was a topic that came up a lot when we have done this type of work, is with our developed self now and with the wisdom that we have now, can we look at that past thing and see it differently and understand it differently, not only ourselves, but those that were a part of that memory or of that experience. Through that lens of wisdom and compassion, can we now understand at a deeper level what was really going on, as opposed to our interpretation of what was going on, where we developed that false belief, and then overlay that with a new perspective, with a new understanding, with grace, with, this added compassion. So I'd love that process. And it sounded like you were going to say something. Okay.
Everything you're saying is, just making me think more about, my beliefs with that too. Like, I don't believe in coincidence. And I'm wondering if that experience a couple weeks ago happened so that I would share that on this podcast. And then I thought, like, think of all those people that are applying for jobs right now, or they get in interviews or do their 8th interview at the same company, whatever. But how many of those people are kicking themselves, being like, oh, I must have messed this up, and ruminating on that.
Right.
And I think that's where people need to realize, like, they're like, I don't know, with the stigma of if you have mental health issues, you're crazy. And it's like, no, it could be just any day common challenges that we all,
off day.
It could just be an off day. Yeah. So like, there are mental health programs, there's modalities, there's different things you can do to help you get past your constant worry or your ruminating that might just be destroying the rest of your day or the rest of your week. And you might just not have gotten that job. You might have had a great interview, but you beat yourself up, and just tear yourself to shreds.
Yeah.
And that's where it's not healthy.
Yeah. I think that's where we attach meaning. And we go, what does it mean about me that I didn't get that job? Or in your situation, what does it mean about you that you froze or that you feel like you messed up in front of an audience? Like, what does that mean about you, right? And that's where I feel like those wounds are, because it's usually about a sense of our own worth being diminished, right? Or of being less than. So I don't know if anything came to your mind just thinking about
all of that, like immediately, like, so why did I beat myself up? Yeah, the underlying belief seems like it's a less than belief, or that it's that means that I'm not worthy, or that I am not good enough, or that, and so you got to unpack that and go deep and spend some time there, and it's uncomfortable, but I want to get past that crap. Yeah. So the next time I freeze, because I was joking around, I was jovial up on stage, and I was just kind of flowing, and then just nothing. But like, why didn't I just say, my mind just went blank? You know what? Ed's the man. Let's get him up on stage, and had fun with it, and nobody would have cared.
Right.
Instead, I froze and I kind of stumbled, and I'm sure people felt bad for me. And then I'm like, come on up, Ed, and then he did. And he did his wonderful speech, but I didn't even hear his speech because I was in my head that whole time.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm sure his speech was awesome according to everybody else there, and I'd heard it before. I also watched a few of his videos to prep. But yeah, like I wasted that whole time because I was in my head beating myself up. So
Man,
yeah,
this is all too real and raw for me because this is how I feel. And Mike gets to be my sounding board every time I get up and just even give an introduction or go up and speak in front of a crowd. I do the same. I do the same thing where I ruminate of just like, oh, I sounded like such an idiot, or I just didn't quite get that out. Or afterwards, I think, oh, I forgot to say this, or I forgot to do that. And again, Mike always is the lucky one that gets to hear about it after, because he helps me process things. And it's an interesting process to hear your story, and it's actually encouraging for me to say, okay, I have to remember that everybody's on this journey, everybody's learning, even the CEOs, even the leaders, they stumble sometimes, and they don't always have it together, which is refreshing for the rest of us, right?
it's so refreshing. Yeah, no, I mean, the more CEO conferences and all these investors I had, they also had CEO retreats, and the more of those I went to, the more I realized everyone's just making stuff up. No one knows what they're doing. And that's the truth. Like, nobody was any different. And we were all having our own struggles, challenges. We were all making our own stupid decisions with our companies, but yeah, like, this is where compassion comes into play. Like, if all leaders could just be more real and not, not put themselves on a pedestal, because that's hard too. Yeah. And it's easy if you have all this employee worship, everyone's trying to get promotions and climb. And so every one of your jokes is the funniest thing they've ever heard, and you could be like, yeah, I am super funny. I am awesome, and keep going down that path. But yeah, the realness, the rawness, I think there's more of that happening in our world. And here in Silicon Slopes and what you guys are doing with your brotherhood, I love it. I love your stories. And I think it keeps that on the forefront of our minds, and just helping everybody realize, like, life's hard, and it's hard for everybody, no matter your position. One of my other friends too sold his company here locally for a couple billion, and
just a couple
billion. Yeah. Right. And he said the next year was the hardest year of his life. Who thinks that? Who doesn't say, man, if only I had a couple billion, then everything would be perfect, But, he and I had a real raw conversation, and the challenges that came with money, the challenges that came with family members and how they treated him differently now that he had money. Like, all new challenges, all new struggles. And so, like, there's just, you don't know what anybody's going through. And it's so easy just to continue to say, you're crushing it, when you might be getting crushed. So that's, I try to keep an open perspective as much as I fail.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I appreciate that so much, because that's been one of the biggest revelations that I've seen is just, as I started to share my story, the amount of people that you wouldn't expect message you behind the scenes or come up to you and say, hey, I felt like I have it all. I felt like I reached my peak, and all of a sudden I realized I'm struggling, and I shouldn't be. And I think that's a lot of us. We put that on ourselves, like, oh, I shouldn't be struggling because I have money. I shouldn't be struggling because I have this position. I shouldn't be struggling because X, Y, or Z. And in reality, a lot of times we're finding these benchmarks, and we say, like you said, once I have a couple billion or even million or 100,000, whatever, then I'll be able to be whatever, a better father, more, all the things. And so it's encouraging to hear. That's been encouraging for me to see in this process, is just how much, and I hate to say everybody's just struggling all the time, because it's not true, but just how universal it is that we all struggle at one point, and we all need support at one point. And I really struggle with people that for the longest time they act as if they don't need help. And I hope obviously that they get the support that they need it whenever they need it. But I think it just goes to the point of how important it is to be vulnerable, to be open, to lead from the front and from behind sometimes, and just show an example of what that looks like, both at a company or in your family, because of what it does for the people that are within your reach. You're giving them permission to be able to open up and share when they're struggling, even if they're not in the moment. They know that when they get to that point, that you or anybody that shares, that they are a safe place to land. So just appreciate you sharing all of that.
Yeah, well, I have two thoughts from what you just said too. I know you guys put on this this little event last week with the Stevens and Mallory and Corey's so good, and seeing their relationship like that. They're a power couple. Yeah. Like, it's so cool. And Corey's still struggling, and he's open about that. But the individual I sat next to after the event, it was the conversations after the event that were really important too. Like, not just what the Stevens were saying, which was amazing. But after, the guy next to me, he's like telling me how much he struggles with like a scarcity mindset financially. And I think he's doing pretty well financially, but honestly, like where I am, I don't have debt, and I still have that scarcity mindset. That's something I'm working on. I'm still going back to the little Johnny's, like, where did scarcity begin? But a lot of things when it comes to finance, we're like, we're going to go broke. We're going to have to sell our home. We're going to have to do this. Or like, there's a lot of that I also see as common. And that's what I saw in my friend. And he's like, hey, can we go to breakfast? Can we go to lunch? And so we've been texting back and forth. And then the other thought that I had is this individual who took his life a month after I left Homey, who was a coworker. He was one of those guys. We had a mental health call every Wednesday that I would just hop on, and any employees could join, and we just chatted about random stuff. And he would help lead those discussions. He never once shared anything of what he was struggling with.
Interesting.
He was my mental health leader on those calls with me. Really tall, handsome guy. He was like one of the most popular guys in college. I knew him from college. Married a beautiful girl in college that was also a friend of mine. Had this beautiful family, bunch of kids. Went and got his MBA at University of Chicago. Like just a scholar, executive. Like everything you'd want on a resume. And just and even texting me on my drive. He had served his mission in Michigan, where I was driving. He's like, "Oh, you got to go here, here, and here." And I was like, "Oh, I haven't heard from you in a little while." But he saw my posts on Instagram, and he's like, "Yeah, I see where you guys are traveling. You need to hit these up." And I did, and then told him, I was like, "Yeah, that was amazing. Thanks for the advice." And 2 days later, just devastating, because he was such a wonderful man, like such a good human, and so brilliant, and it makes no sense. And how many people are like him out there? That's this fire. That's why you guys started this. Like, and that's why I'm wanting to help however I can too. It's important. It matters. And what Corey said too, like he just looked at everybody and said, "You matter." Those were the best words he shared that whole anything that he said. He's like, if you have a heartbeat, he talked about his little son who died. Like, if you have a heartbeat and you exist, you matter. And he said, "I see you." Like a couple really just powerful words that can go really far.
Beautiful.
I love that. It's kind of where I was wanting to lead into of like, what do you think? What do you like for you? What do you do to help others, including your own family, or in leadership role? There's that leading by example that John mentioned of I'm willing to be open and authentic. That's obviously a huge thing. Are there other things that you're thinking about, like what you do to help and support others along their journeys while also keeping yourself in a good space?
Yeah, I think helping others helps you and keep yourself in a good space. Because I mean, if you're preaching at everybody of how to go meditate and you're not meditating, it's like, I need to go. I need to wake up tomorrow morning and do it. You don't want to be a hypocrite. But no, what came to my mind is with my family, my kids, we talk about mental health all the time with our children. And, an example, like, because we talk about it so much, we were at a baseball game a few years ago, and my son thought the game was boring and went and played on the little playground in the back. But he came back, and a bully had tried to take his little mini baseball bat that we had just bought him.
Mm.
And he wouldn't let it go. And then the bully finally gave up. The bully, he was just an older kid. The older kid finally let go and then just ripped into him and called him all these names.
Mm.
And then my son came over and just explained this scenario. And we were like, we thought, are you shaken up? Like, how are you doing? But he seemed just on his game.
Mm.
And he's not always this way, right? Like we all have our ups and downs,
Right.
but he said that boy must have a lot of holes inside of him.
Wow.
Wow.
All those names that he was calling me, like he must be hurting.
Mm-hmm.
So he recognized in the moment, instead of taking in all of those names, because he made fun of how he looked,
Mm-hmm.
and that he was short and little and skinny or whatever, like the things that he could have taken personal. But he just saw that person for who he was. And I'm like, man, we don't do that even as adults, right? Like,
Yeah.
if we're attacked, it's like, let's fight, but and he was like, no, I'm good. I'm just not going to go to that playground and like, I'll wait for him to go do his thing. But he looked on him with compassion.
Wow.
How old was he?
Oh, he's 12 now. So that probably, he was 9 or 10.
That's
That's so
amazing.
powerful to
Yeah.
see that the emotional intelligence of a 9-year-old saying something like that. I think that's so powerful and just goes to show what, I mean, if you guys have been talking about it for years, it just shows how powerful it is to be talking about it. And that
Yeah.
was my next question, was just how do you start that conversation with your kids? When is too early, or too, maybe that's not even a good question either, when it's too early, but how do you bring that up?
I think these are just typical principles, like hearing you say less than and hearing you talk
Mhm.
about worth. Like, I don't know what therapist you've gone to or what counseling or what programs you've looked into, but I think there is general vernacular
Yeah.
that's out there. And I don't think there is too early of an age. I mean, again, with this timeline therapy, trying to understand the holes that exist in my body, that what needs to be plugged, where I have weaknesses. We just have talked to our kids about that. And so they just put that into practice with this experience. And they saw, oh, he's lashing out because he's hurting.
And we get so many opportunities as parents for practical application of those things, right? So it's a constant classroom, I guess.
And you got to know that every time my son has seen me lashing out at anybody, he's like, Dad, are you hurting? And I'm like, shut up.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, you've armed him with
Yeah,
these.
And he's the kid that's not shy. So
yeah,
he'll
speak
for
up.
sure speak up and
Nice.
call me out and call others out. And we're like, well, still got to do it in an emotionally intelligent way.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
thanks for calling me out.
They're so good at
So,
keeping us accountable.
right.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing these insights with us. If there was any last message, idea, concept that you would like to share with us and with our audience, you're welcome to, have a last word, and then we'll wrap up.
Probably just to reiterate what I've said on being compassionate toward others that are hurting. But to get curious, learn, grow yourself, analyze you. And as you do and learn, like, you're going to be more mentally healthy, and you can share whatever you're learning with others. And so, yeah, there's so much to learn. That's where, again, my wife and I, we just, every conversation is a fairly deep conversation. And it's amazing. We're not just talking about sports or politics or whatever dumb is happening in the world. Like we can work on ourselves and try to add value in our little local community by being better people and raising our kids to, add value to society. So those are my
Awesome.
parting words.
Love it.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks
appreciate
for
it.
having me. This is a great conversation.
Yeah.
Amen. Thanks for joining us, and appreciate all the great insights that you brought to us and to our audience.
Yeah, thank you.